Friedrich Nietzsche was not a comfortable philosopher. He did not offer consolation, did not construct systems designed to make the human condition feel manageable or meaningful in the ways that comfort requires. He looked at the mechanics of human behavior, the real mechanics, beneath the moral frameworks and social conventions that civilization uses to organize itself. And he reported what he saw with a precision that made him one of the most quoted and most misunderstood thinkers in history. And what he saw, across decades of philosophical observation, was a power dynamic so pervasive, so embedded in the ordinary texture of human interaction, that most people participate in it daily on one side or the other, without ever developing the language to name what is happening. He called it ressentiment, and it is the most sophisticated covert power move available to someone who cannot compete directly, cannot match strength with strength, cannot win in open contest, cannot accumulate power through the channels that direct accumulation requires. It is the mechanism through which weakness becomes control, through which limitation becomes leverage. But he respected its precision, and he understood with the clarity that made his work simultaneously celebrated and feared, that the people most vulnerable to it are almost always the ones with the most to lose. The strong ones, the ones who feel things deeply, the ones who have not yet learned that their capacity for guilt is not a virtue. It is an entry point. Nietzsche's concept of ressentiment emerged from his analysis of what he called slave morality, the value system that develops in people who are structurally prevented from expressing power directly. The person who can act, who has the strength, the resources, the social position, or the psychological freedom to pursue their desires openly, does not need ressentiment. They have direct routes available. They take them. The person who cannot act directly develops something else, a relationship with power that operates entirely through the psychology of others, that does not accumulate strength, but instead depletes it in the people around them, in the environment they inhabit, in the specific targets their ressentiment has identified as both the source of their limitation and the vehicle of their indirect control. The mechanism works through moral reframing. What the strong person experiences as natural self-expression, confidence, ambition, the unapologetic pursuit of desire, gets reframed as a moral failing, as arrogance, as selfishness, as the kind of character defect that a good person, a caring person, a person with genuine values, would be ashamed of. The reframe is delivered not through argument but through atmosphere, through the specific quality of disappointment that lands heavier than anger, through the withdrawn approval that communicates, without explicit statement, that the strong person's natural state of being is causing harm to someone who deserves better. And the strong person, the one with the genuine capacity for guilt, for empathy, for the kind of self-examination that limited people never subject themselves to, begins to manage themselves in response, begins to make themselves smaller, quieter, less, not because they have been forced to, because they have been made to feel that their natural size is a form of violence against someone who cannot match it. Nietzsche identified ressentiment as a creative act, and he meant this precisely. The person deploying it is not passively suffering. They are actively constructing a psychological environment in which the strong person's strengths become liabilities. The operational sequence moves through several distinct phases. The first is the establishment of moral authority. Before the control can be exercised, the person must position themselves as the ethical reference point of the relationship, as the one who feels more, cares more, sacrifices more, as the one whose sensitivity and vulnerability constitute a kind of moral superiority over the person whose strength they intend to weaponize against them. This positioning is rarely explicit. It accumulates through small gestures, through the consistent performance of being affected, through the careful cultivation of an identity built around suffering and endurance. The second is the identification of the target's guilt architecture and early experiences that make them susceptible to the particular accusation that their strength is harmful. The person deploying ressentiment locates this architecture with the precision of someone whose survival has depended on reading the psychological vulnerabilities of stronger people, and they construct their moral reframe around it, targeting not the strength in general, but the specific expression of it that the target is least able to defend without feeling like the villain of their own story. The third is the deployment of indirect pressure. Not demands, not ultimatums. Not the kind of explicit conflict that would allow the strong person to locate the source of pressure and respond to it directly. Instead, withdrawal, sadness, the performance of quiet suffering that communicates, without accusation, that the strong person's behavior is the cause. That adjustment, not confrontation, is what love or decency or basic consideration requires. The fourth is the consolidation of the adjustment. Once the strong person has made themselves smaller in response to the pressure, has moderated the expression of strength that was identified as harmful, that moderation becomes the new baseline. It's the reference point against which future expressions of strength will be measured and found wanting. The control has been established not through force, but through the strong person's own guilt having been redirected against themselves. Nietzsche's most uncomfortable insight was not about the people deploying ressentiment. It was about the people receiving it, the capacity that makes someone genuinely strong, the ability to feel deeply, to examine themselves honestly, to take seriously the possibility that their actions have caused harm, is precisely the capacity that ressentiment requires to function. The person without empathy, without the capacity for guilt, the withdrawal of approval produces no adjustment. The performance of suffering generates no response that the operator can work with. Specifically, the strong person, the one with genuine values, genuine empathy, genuine investment in being good, who is most completely available to this form of control. Nietzsche was not suggesting that empathy and guilt are weaknesses to be eliminated. He was pointing at something more precise and more actionable than that. He was identifying the specific distortion that ressentiment introduces, the conversion of genuine moral sensitivity into a management tool operated by someone else. The guilt is real. The empathy is real. The desire to avoid causing harm is real. So what is not real is the framing that your natural strength is the harm being caused. So that framing is the operation, and it requires your genuine moral seriousness to run. The signal that ressentiment is operating in a relationship is specific and felt, rather than observed. 'Tis the experience of consistently managing yourself, moderating your energy. But because you have been made to feel, through a process you cannot fully reconstruct, that your unmoderated self is too much, too loud, too strong, too selfish, to something that a better version of you would have already corrected. That feeling, that specific, persistent, sourceless sense that your natural state of being requires justification, is the framework having done its work. Nietzsche's prescription was not cruelty, it was clarity. The recognition that genuine moral accountability requires a genuine wrong, a real harm, a real violation, a real failure of the values you actually hold. It's not the performance of a wrong constructed by someone whose survival depends on making your strength feel like they're suffering. You are allowed to be large. You are allowed to be direct. The person who has made you feel otherwise has not identified your flaw. They have identified your entry point. The moment you understand the difference, the framework loses the only thing that was ever making it work. Your own conscience turned against yourself. That ends now. Until next time.